Okay, Dave.
Good morning, everybody. Those who are on Zoom and those who are in the Centennial Complex and those who will be on Facebook and YouTube. So welcome to all of you. This is from the Wisdom of Solomon, which is one of the books in the Apocrypha and in the New Revised Standard Version. Wisdom is radiant and unfading, and she is easily discerned by those who love her and is found by those who seek her. She hastens to make herself known to those who desire her. One who rises early to seek her will have no difficulty, for she will be found sitting at the gate. To fix one's thought on her is perfect understanding, and one who is vigilant on her account will soon be free from care, because she goes about seeking those who are worthy of her, and she graciously appears to them in their paths and meets them in every thought. The beginning of wisdom is the most sincere desire for instruction, and concern for instruction is love of her, and love of her is keeping her commandments and laws, and giving heed to her laws is the assurance of immortality. And immortality brings one near to God, so the desire for wisdom leads to a kingdom. To God, again, we pause for a moment of thanks at the beginning of another session at the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School. We are mindful of those all over the world who are suffering, but particularly those in Ukraine. And we look for some way to end that carnage. We are thankful, though, today, especially for Dr. Gang and the message he will bring to us. It's an unusual message for Sabbath school, and we will need wisdom more than all. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. We are fortunate to have Dr. Jeffrey Yang with us today. He is a professor in the School of Religion at Loma Linda University, and he is a specialist in the thought of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But on the side, he also has other interests, and one of those interests is artificial intelligence. So we're going to hear from him on that subject, I hope. Jeff, are you there? Let's see. I think I saw him on the participants list.
He's here, but we're not hearing you, Jeff. And you're not muted, I don't think.
I'm not seeing him either.
Jeff is there.
Okay.
He's there. He's there.
I'm here now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And we can
I'm sorry,
see.
I had the wrong microphone selected. My apologies. Nice to see you, Dr. Larson. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for that introduction.
Thank you. We are looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you.
Maybe I can ask a few questions for those who may not know you, and even for me.
Sure.
Because I don't know that much about you yet. I don't think you grew up in California. Am I correct?
I did not, but I was born in California.
Really?
Yeah. I've come
Loma
full
Linda?
circle. No, I was born in Oakland, California. My father graduated from dental school here in 1966 and then spent a couple years before he started his practice back east in New Jersey, where he grew up and where I grew up. In the Allied Health Service, and he did dentistry in the Coast Guard, just there near the naval base in Oakland, and that's where I was born.
Is that Alameda?
Alameda, yeah. I was actually, my parents lived in Alameda, and I just lived there for a short time. I don't have any recollection, and then I moved back to the Northeast in New Jersey, about an hour from New York City, out in the country, and near Garden State Academy, and that's where I grew up in that part of the U.S., and then kind of made my way to the south, ended up going to Shenandoah Valley Academy, and then to Southern Adventist University, then Southern College, and then Andrews, and then spent some time in Florida pastoring, and then ended up here in California.
Well, you missed an important spot along the way.
Where's that?
Somewhere you met your wife.
Yes, I met Gina at Southern. Yes, she was there when I was there, and I'm very grateful for that encounter.
Right. Now, you tell us a little bit about your interest in Bonhoeffer.
Yes, I was first introduced to Dietrich Bonhoeffer in seminary through Dr. Randall Wisby. He was one of my mentors, and I was first introduced to the cost of discipleship as I knew it back then by Dr. Wisby, and didn't think too much of it, read it a little bit, but I didn't really start taking Bonhoeffer seriously until well into my pastoral ministry. I was on a pastoral sabbatical, and I decided to just come up with a reading list, and I decided I wanted to read up on Bonhoeffer, and that's kind of how I re-engaged Bonhoeffer so many years later. And that's kind of led me down that trajectory. And then I decided for some reason, to go back and try to work on another doctoral degree. And I decided that's what I wanted to put my focus on. And so I started looking for people that were doing work in Bonhoeffer, and probably one of the places in the world right now that has the most Bonhoeffer scholars is the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. So I applied there and was accepted, and started working with a Bonhoeffer scholar by the name of Philip Ziegler.
Okay.
And he's a Barth scholar as well, Protestant theology. And so that was kind of how that journey. But so I appreciate, one of the things I think I most appreciate about Bonhoeffer, he's one of the few theologians that we can be so intimately connected to his story, and his life is so much entwined in his theology and his work.
Now you're part of the Adventist Peace movement, is that
yes, I'm a board member for Adventist Peace Fellowship, yes, which was started many years ago by Dr. Morgan, who was one of my history professors at Southern, actually, when he was just starting out.
The Bonhoeffer's life and thought could not be more timely, it seems to me.
There's always this question of, is this a Bonhoeffer moment? And we're always asking that question and wondering, and I certainly feels that way often these days.
Also, that's a common thing for people to say, this is the moment where he is especially relevant. That's interesting. Yeah.
But what's interesting is how many people like to quote Bonhoeffer, and oftentimes take him, like as often can happen, take him out of context. And so you've got, everyone's quoting Bonhoeffer these days, it seems to me, people on all different political, theological views. Bonhoeffer is kind of a Rorschach test in my mind, theological Rorschach test. You can really make Bonhoeffer say anything you want, and you can read him any you want. So you've got the Eric Metaxas of the world who turn him into a conservative evangelical, and you've got the Clifford Greens, who's probably one of the most foremost Bonhoeffer scholars, who believes he's an atheist. Was an atheist. So, you've got all different views on him.
How does one move from Bonhoeffer to artificial intelligence?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know, though. I think that Bonhoeffer, as I do quote Bonhoeffer, I will quote him today. And I mean, I think he was living in a time when technology was more important than people. And in a sense, a different kind of technology, of course. But I think I have a lot of different interests. One of my interests is in, Christian anthropology, and this question of, and I think my teaching here at Loma Linda has led me down this path of always seeking to further understand what it means to be human and human wholeness. And I think, so that's really where Bonhoeffer has a lot to say about that, but also, so that's kind of how I went into this study of artificial intelligence.
Before we go further into that, let me just say something. There is nothing more lonely, I think, than writing a dissertation in theology or religious studies. It is just incredibly solitary, and I think it's right to say 50% of people in our fields never get their doctorates because they've done the coursework and they've done the exam, but it is such a lonely vigil after that that one begins wondering, why did I do this? Nobody cares, and so forth and so on. So if you're ever feeling that way, don't feel like you're the first one.
No, I appreciate that, Dave. And I look to you as someone who was able to pull off two as well. So I hope I can continue to follow in your footsteps.
Well, over to you a little more fully on artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Yes. I'm wondering what you would like. Would you just like me to do? I mean, I have there's a number of different ways you can approach it. I mean, I have a presentation I can share. It's based on my work I've been doing recently, and I'm happy to share my screen if you want me to do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
How much time would you say I have roughly?
Oh, we'll stop no matter where you are
Okay.
on this in your presentation at 11:30.
Okay.
But then we can pick it up after that. So
Okay. And we want to have this. We want to have plenty of time for discussion, right? I'm assuming. I
Right.
hope. Yeah.
But you should feel at leisure. That's one of the great things to be on Zoom. We don't have to meet some time frame. So let's see your presentation, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Can you enable me? Can I?
Please say something?
Yes.
The presentation is after 11:30. The conversation is after 11:30, so you can take time with the presentation until then.
Oh, great, Dana. Okay, thank you. Can someone enable me to share my screen? Or maybe I already have that ability.
Now, what do I need to do? Looks
Like,
like
are you? Let's see. I mean, hold on.
I've got a blue field.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, there we go. Perfect.
Are you seeing my notes or are you seeing my slide?
We're seeing your title page.
Okay, good. All right. So the title of this presentation is titled as an algorithm shall lead them: the rise of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and Christian hope. So this is based on a paper that I presented at Adventist Society of Religious Studies back in November in San Antonio, and then subsequently was I turned it into a long form paper that was submitted to Spectrum recently in this first quarter of Spectrum, the Journal of Adventist Forum. And which was pretty exciting to do because now that Alexander Carpenter has become the new editor, they've initiated a peer review process that you can choose, authors can choose. And so I was honored to get to be one of the first people to go through a peer review process on this paper. So it's really exciting to have that done. So that's what this is basically part. And then this last weekend, the Adventist Peace Fellowship, we just had a conference that we did, a private conference. We're getting ready to hopefully do a book out of the work that we're doing. And I presented another version of this there as well. So yeah, let's gonna get into this. I'm just going to roughly kind of walk you through a lot of the ideas that I have in the paper that's in Spectrum. Maybe some of you haven't had an opportunity to see that, so it's not necessarily new. But so the reality is that we are in the midst of what many people are calling a fourth industrial revolution. That's a term that was it's attributed to Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, and he described it to as a way of talking about this turn in our world towards smart technology. And he sees this as a fundamentally different from previous technological revolutions because of the significant consequences it has for the earth. And what we're coming to realize is that technology is truly altering life on our planet. And this is in multiple ways, from working, interacting with one another, to understanding even this question of what it means to be human. And many of these advancements, on the one hand, are full of promise. Proponents of AI you see these technologies as having the ability to to solve some of humanity's greatest challenges. I mean, we're talking ending extreme poverty, solving economic disparities, eradicating diseases, preventing global pandemics even, and even slowing climate change and saving us from ecological disaster. So some fear, though, on the other hand, the worst from artificial intelligence. And while every technological advancement has brought forms of prosperity to humanity, let's look at history. Our advancements have oftentimes unleashed unforeseen consequences. And so artificial intelligence may cure diseases, lift billions out of poverty, prevent environmental collapse, but AI may also lead to global dictatorships, worldwide surveillance states, and levels of inequality and suffering beyond our imaginations. As Max Tegmark, a leading researcher and artificial intelligence professor of MIT, states in a film called I, Human, I highly recommend this film, it's fascinating. IA will ultimately be either the best thing ever to happen to humanity or the worst thing ever to happen. And that's why this is the most important conversation of our time. So let's try to maybe define artificial intelligence. It's a very broad term. And here I'm using it extremely broadly to describe multiple different types of smart technologies that utilize deep structured learning through static rule-based algorithms. And these are crucial to various types of automation. So, for example, in AI in the Wild, Sustainability in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, Peter Devarney describes these technologies as follows. And I think this is a definition we ought to take a serious look at. He says very broadly, artificial intelligence is the ability for machines to mimic human thinking, learning, reasoning, planning, communication, and decision-making. One day, this will reach a point where a machine equals and then likely exceeds in short order the intellectual ability of the brightest human on the planet. What some call human level AI and others artificial and general intelligence. But that day is still a ways off. And what we have now, as with the AlphaZero chess engine, is an expanding constellation of narrow, domain-specific cognitive technologies such as computer vision, natural language processing, virtual agents, recommendation engines, decision management software, predictive analytics, intelligent automation, and machine learning models. So it's a very broad subject, and there's an immense amount of things to cover. It's almost impossible to get it all now. But I think when a lot of people think of AI, they're thinking of what we call artificial general intelligence, like we'll see in movies, where that is just a very long ways off, where an AI can be rival the smartest human beings on the planet. And there's many people that believe that that will eventually happen. But right now, AI as we know it is quite limited. And that's why we call it artificial narrow intelligence, or ANI. And that's what you and I know every day we encounter it every day through things like Siri and Alexa. If you have a Tesla, that's ANI. That's where we're at right now. Now, in this paper that I just did and the subsequent article, I ask a number of questions that I'm wrestling with. And the key, so one of the key questions for me is, what is the effect of technology on humanity? That's the overall question I'm having, that I'm really thinking about. And so I've identified two what I call anthropological concerns, and then there's actually a third one that's what I call an ecclesial ethical concern and question. So the first one I want to look at with you is, in what ways does technology form us as human beings? Okay. And then another question to look at is, what does our use of technology imply about our nature as humans? So the first question is, I would call this a formational question. And then the second one is ontological. It's a being question, like what does it mean to be human? And then this third question is, what is ecclesial ethical? Like, what is the responsibility of the church in light of these emerging technologies? And we could spend hours on each of these questions, but we're obviously our time is limited. So let me begin with this the first thing here. Let me just first let's acknowledge that where I started today, and that is that there is both promise and peril in AI and machine learning and robotics and these emerging smart technologies. And so the question is, will machines be our salvation, or should machines be feared? And again, that's a common theme in science fiction films such as The Matrix. I'm a huge fan of the original Matrix trilogy. The fourth one I wasn't too really thrilled with. I was disappointed by it. But for better or worse, the machines are here to stay. So in Scary Smart, the future of artificial intelligence is how you can save our world, Mo Godot, who was a former chief business officer at Google X and now called X Development LLC, warns this. He says, 3 inevitables await us. 1, AI will happen. There's no stopping it. 2, the machines will become smarter than humans sooner rather than later. And 3, mistakes will happen and bad things will happen. And so then he goes on then to say that this is that very much that we need to take this seriously, because AI is kind of like intelligent infants. They're going to become smarter than us. And so he argues we need to raise them well. Kevin Roose, a technology journalist for the New York Times, describes himself about when he thinks about AI. He says, I'm a sub-optimist. And it's a term that Roose created to express how he feels about the future of AI. So he says, on the one hand, I'm optimistic about the benefits of artificial intelligence for humanity. He says, but on the other hand, I'm pessimistic about humanity's ability to use AI for good. And, there's many reasons for being optimistic. So, for example, healthcare right now is one of the places where AI is advancing the fastest. And so, for example, in healthcare, one of the ways that AI is being employed is to be able to detect heart arrhythmias, undetectable heart arrhythmias, or diagnose breast cancer more accurately. Incredible things are happening. I heard a story of a man who, thanks to AI, was in the Mayo Clinic, they were able to find an undetectable heart arrhythmia because of the technology that they're using that he would have gone undiagnosed and he could have likely have died from. So there's incredible things are happening with AI. Another example of this is the way that AI is being used to try to slow global warming. So, for example, there's a form of AI called Ada. It's a machine learning robotic platform that has been created to mitigate climate change by a team of researchers that are at work in Canada. And the Ada robot, can work 10 times faster than human researchers. And so Ada performs all kinds of experiments, analyzes data, develops hypotheses, pursues new directions for environmental research. And Ada's creators claim that the robot is, and I quote, alive and training itself. And Ada is not like a robot, like a machine you see walking around. It looks like a humanoid, right? It's just a computer program that's doing this work. But having said all that, there are, while there's plenty of benefits for AI, there's plenty of reasons to be pessimistic as well. And especially when we consider the observations of leading thinkers in artificial intelligence like Ben Goertzel, an AI researcher and CEO and founder of SingularityNet, and who is seeking to democratize AI technologies. Goertzel says, and I quote, almost all the AI development on the planet today is done by a handful of big technology companies or by a few large governments. If we look at what AI is mostly being developed for, he says, I would say it's killing, spying, and brainwashing. And I think that we should be concerned about that. All right, so just having said all that, now let me get to these questions. So let's look at this first one here. So while artificial intelligence presents humanity with many questions, I think some of the most significant questions are anthropological. And the first one here is what I call formational. So how is technology forming us as human beings? So, most of us own one of the most advanced forms of AI on Earth, and that is our smartphones. That is right now the predominant form of AI we experience on a daily basis. And inevitably, when we have these conversations about AI right now, this is where we usually go to. These are where our conversations usually go to, how we're interacting with it through our phones. And these phones are essentially computers that have the power to harness more data than that was required to land on the moon. More data than Neil Armstrong had in his capsule going to the moon. And they are not passive forms of technology. Intelligent algorithms control our phones. These algorithms are designed to seek our full attention, to keep us ever more beholden to our devices. And they mine our data daily, which is the new gold, all the while leading us, shaping us, forming us into becoming a particular kind of human being. So what I argue is that these machines, this technology, amazing technology that we have at our disposal, this is not neutral technology, okay? We need to remember that. So we tend to think of AI more like the sentient computer HAL. Maybe you remember that from Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? But in reality, most forms of artificial intelligence are just simply boring lines of computer code that exist as algorithms beyond our sight, often unnoticed, as Lisa Kinsler observes in her fascinating recent essay in the New York Times on AI and religion, Can Silicon Valley Find God? Kinsler says there that AI is already embedded in our everyday lives. She says it influences which streets we walk down, which clothes we buy, which articles we read, who we date, and where and how we choose to live. She says it's ubiquitous, yet it remains obscure, invoked all too often as an otherworldly, almost godlike invention, rather than the product of an iterative series of mathematical equations. So many of us are beginning, people are more and more beginning to question what this form of technology is doing to us. And people are growing concerned about our dependence on these algorithms embedded in our everyday lives. And so more of us are questioning what these technologies are doing to our humanity. One of these is Kevin Roose, I've already referred to in his recent book from this past year, really interesting book, Future Proof: 9 Rules for Humans in the Age of Automation. And in that book, Roose says, if we consider how much of our daily decisions we outsource to machines, it's hard not to think that a historic species-level transformation is taking place. So artificial intelligence was originally designed to read our minds, but now AI is designed to change our minds. Technology scholar Christian Sandvig refers to AI's shift to persuasion as what he calls corrupt personalization. In other words, how am I making my choices? Am I choosing to watch that Netflix movie because I want to, or because I'm persuaded to for reasons I'm not fully aware? And really what this is doing, I think this is actually calling into question everything we know about free will. And so Kevin Roose warns us of what he calls machine drift, allowing technology to shape our identities incrementally without our full awareness. And he warns, and I think this is fully worth reading the full quote, it's not enough to accompany us to the store whispering into our ears about which brand of toothpaste or toilet paper we should buy. In the eyes of the engineers and the executives who use recommendation algorithms to steer our choices, all of our actions must be part of the machine's model. There's no space in this vision of the automated future for developing new tastes or starting over with a clean slate. Who you are is who the machines think you are, which is also who they want you to be. Some of you during the pandemic may have seen this film that came out on Netflix, The Social Dilemma. Ironically, Netflix puts this movie out, and fascinating docudrama. If you haven't seen the film, it attempts to show how smart technologies, primarily through social media, have led to a mental health crisis around the world. And if you look at it right now, more and more people are recognizing that fear, anxiety, depression have increased significantly, especially among adolescents. Some cite rising amounts of suicide among teens as a reason. The Social Dilemma is a very entertaining film, very frightening film on many levels. And in that film, it features many individuals who have worked in technology companies such as Facebook, Google, Twitter, which all use these mathematical algorithms to mine data. And mostly the people in this film are former employees. So there's nobody that's actually working for them right now. They're in the film. But they really are questioning what these now have become institutions are doing across the world. And, Facebook actually has more followers outside the United States than it does in, and has more influence around the world out in other countries than it does the United States, which is fascinating as well to think about. But the film also features an addiction specialist, a physician by the name of Anna Lembke, who serves at Stanford University's director of addiction medicine. And Lembke in that film believes that we can become addicted to technology in the same way that we can become addicted to drugs or alcohol. Isn't that interesting? And she actually has written a book, just came out recently, called Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in an Age of Indulgence, in which she argues in that book that our understanding of addiction needs to be broadened. And there she writes that we have transformed the world from a place of scarcity to a place of overwhelming abundance. Drugs, food, news, gambling, shopping, gaming, texting, sexting, Facebooking, Instagramming, YouTubing, tweeting. The increased numbers, variety, and potency of highly rewarding stimuli today is staggering. The smartphone is the modern day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation. If you haven't met your drug of choice yet, it's coming soon to a website near you. So I find that interesting. And we say, well, maybe that's true for some of the younger generation. But my friends, I have to tell you, my own parents, I am shocked. They come over to my house to visit, and we're sitting around having a conversation. My dad is on his phone more than me. So I've talked to him about it. I mean, this can, and it doesn't matter what generation from you are. This can suck us all in, and easily we can all become addicted to our devices. So a few years ago, well, first of all, let me just say this. One of the things I'm noticing in my research is that a lot of Adventists are not having these conversations. A lot of other Christians are, and other places around the world in different groups, especially in the American Academy of Religion. There's an ongoing working group talking about these things. Especially we'll get into this about in the field of transhumanist studies. But a few years ago, Spectrum actually hosted an online discussion of James Williams' book, Stand Out of Our Light, Freedom and Resistance in the Attention Economy. And Spectrum's discussion of Stand Out of Our Light is, from what I can tell, is one of the more significant discussions I've seen to date among Seventh-day Adventists about the effects of technology. And in this book, Stand Out of Our Light, Williams is a really good book. Williams joins a growing body of work questioning what technology is doing to our humanity. Another book is in this vein, which actually was earlier. It was Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. That was written over a decade ago. And so Williams is a former Google advertising strategist and who's become concerned about AI's growing influence and its impact on humanity. And in that book, one of the things that he warns, he says, look, these new, he calls them attentional adversaries, threaten not only the success, but even the integrity of the human will at both individual and collective levels. I noticed I was on your Facebook page and I was noticing some of the different resources that some of you were sharing about AI in anticipation for today. Someone posted a very fascinating YouTube conversation with a Buddhist philosopher. And one of the points that he makes that, that all world religions share in their practices is that many of their spiritual practices involve attention. And he says that one of the greatest threats of technology today, if we're not careful, is our attentions. So I like how Williams calls this these are attentional adversaries. Anyway, so this was a fascinating discussion. You can go find it. A number of Adventist scholars were a part of that discussion. One of them was my colleague here in the School of Religion, Zane Yee, our associate dean here in the School of Religion. And Zane discussed Williams' concerns in his essay, Disordered and Reordered Loves. And Zane recognized there how the influence of artificial intelligence extends beyond the ability to affect our attention. And he said that the threat of AI is actually existential, and that it lies below the surface of every issue confronting humanity's existence, calling into question what it actually means to be human. And so in summarizing one of William's key arguments, Zane wrote, "The stakes in question are the fundamental capacities beyond our actions, what makes us distinctively human. The constant connection and information technology offers us disrupts and disorders our lives at deep levels, both individually and collectively." The Rabbit Hole is a fascinating podcast I encourage you to check out. It's from the New York Times, also by Kevin Roose, who I've cited here now a couple times. Roose, in that podcast, provides a chilling example of the ways technology, as Zane was saying, disrupts and disorders our lives. Because there we're introduced to a young man who is radicalized to the alt-right while viewing YouTube content about his favorite video games. And consequently, he's led down a very dark hole of misinformation and hate-filled content, exposing him to ever more fanciful conspiracy theories, including QAnon. And so the question is here, who is leading this young man? Well, believe it or not, it is a form of AI. It is, in this case of YouTube, it is a Google algorithm, which was designed to keep him viewing more content on YouTube. It was just, that's the only purpose. And I think though, we need to be mindful of this because the story is illustrated for all of us. We may not be that lonely, isolated adolescent who spends hours a day locked in their bedroom binge watching YouTube videos. But are we entirely aware of the way that technology is forming us and shaping us and molding us? In Desiring the Kingdom, Worship, Worldview, and Cultural Formation, Christian philosopher James K. Smith has, I think, something to say about this indirectly, where he refers to humans as what he calls liturgical animals, because he says we are embodied, practicing creatures who have kind of this, we're wired up for love and desire. Our love and desire is aimed at something ultimate, right? And he says that we are what we love. We are what we love. And then he goes on to say that our love is shaped and primed and aimed by liturgical practices that take hold of our guts and our hearts to certain ends. So he uses this idea of liturgical practices very broadly to say, look, your daily habits, if you get in your car in the morning and you turn on NPR and you listen to NPR all the way to work, or you can listen to some other inflammatory talk radio or podcast or something, and you do that every day, you're driving on the freeway to work, that is a liturgical practice that's shaping you significantly. It's a significant practice that has, he would call it, has thick or meaning to it, right? And so he goes on to observe, and I'll quote, he says this, says, these are habits that play a significant role in shaping our identity, who we are. Engaging in these habit-forming practices not only says something about us, but also keeps shaping us into that kind of a person, excuse me. So habits often both signal and shape our core values or our most significant desires. So here you may be recognizing another ancient theologian coming through here, and that is Augustine, and Augustine's Anthropology of Desire, because Smith relies on him a lot, where Augustine once said in the Confessions, you rouse them to take delight in praising you, for you have made us for yourself, right? And our hearts are restless until they come to rest in you. So if we were to take Smith's line of thought, how does our use of technology function as a liturgical practice? Often, without our full awareness, luring us away from being formed by our Creator and diminishing the imago Dei in us. So Felicia Wu Song is a cultural sociologist of media and digital technologies, and she also draws on Smith's notion of habit-forming liturgies in her recent book, just came out this past year, Restless Devices, Recovering Personhood, Presence, and Place in the Digital Age, where she makes a similar connection to how technology forms us. Wu Song sees the ways we interact with technology, as she calls them, embodied practices that possess the power to cultivate the stuff of our imaginations and the very longings of our being. And she argues that our digital routines and habits, so pervasive in their range, are no longer merely matters of incidental preferences or personal inclination. And so as we see in the story of that young man who I talked about just momentarily ago, who's led down this rabbit hole of hatred and conspiracy theories, the lens of liturgy reveals our digital routines to be the consequential matters of personal and soul formation that they actually are. And so Wu Song sees a deeply embodied anthropology here, and we often fail to see how our daily activities and routines shape us bodily. And I think this is really important for Seventh-day Adventists, who we have this idea that we are templed bodies, that the Spirit of God dwells in us, right? So we take, our bodies, as the temples of God, about what we eat and drink and those kind of things. But what about this, as how this affects us bodily? And so, drawing on the Aristotelian notion that we are morally developed not only by ideas and beliefs, Wu Song argues that we are also formed by the cumulative manifestation of our corporeal actions, behaviors. So then how does technology form us as human beings? And in seeking to answer that question, Wu Song contends that, and I quote, that the actions we take with our bodies, what we say, what we wear, how we behave, have the steady effect of ever shaping our imaginations, our very understanding and experiences of reality. And she asserts, and this is worth, I think, quoting in full. She says, it may well be the case that our body's routine behaviors and actions not only reveal our deepest desires, but also regularly shape our taste for where we want to go. If we begin to pay attention to not only the cerebral and cognitive content of our lived experience, but also the visceral and bodily, we might begin to see how our mundane digital practices are hardly docile or inconsequential. They are, in fact, doing a work on us, developing in us capacities, desires, and longings for a particular version of the good life. Any liturgy, whatever any liturgy, whatever its content or intention functions to shape us, it just depends on whether it points us toward the kingdom of God or something else in which we are resting our security and hope. And so I can't help, when I read that, I could not help but think of this famous quote by Ellen White that I grew up with. My parents would cite this to me all the time. Remember, Jeff, it is a law of the human mind that by beholding, we become changed, right? We all know that, or most of us do, I'm sure. And I think that there's some neuroscientists that I think would probably agree with this. And others. So, for example, Jeffrey Schwartz, who is a research psychiatrist at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, he writes a lot about the intersection of neuroscience and spiritual formation, which, Dave, is a whole nother area that I've become interested in recently. And I think that he would agree with White, because Schwartz contends that there is significant experimental evidence that directing your attention towards spiritual growth literally changes your brain. However, he also warns that the opposite is true, that our brains can become increasingly controlled by what he calls the animal brain mechanisms, right? So, the limbic system, that lower regions of our brain, forming us in undesirable ways. In other words, I think Schwartz suggesting that the things we give our attention to have the potential to dehumanize us, often without our conscious awareness. So yeah, Ellen White, it is a law of the human mind that by beholding, we become changed. All right. So let's move on. And this is the second question. And we'll move this a little more quickly here because time is ticking away. So this one is, here's the ontological question. So what does AI-driven technologies mean for the nature of humanity? And here's where a lot of the work of the transhumanists, I think, come into question. So Kevin Kelly, one of the co-founders of Wired Magazine, observed in his book, The Inevitable, a number of years ago, Understanding the 12 Technological Forces That Will Shape Our Future, artificial intelligence is, he argues, is going to redefine the very nature of what it means to be human. And he's very optimistic about AI. He's high on technology. But he actually goes on to say, he argues in this book that that AI is going to do incredible things. But the greatest benefit, he says, of AI is that AIs are actually going to define humanity. He says, and I quote, "We need AIs to tell us who we are." That's fascinating. So whether we remain optimistic about all this, about what the future of AI or not, our growing independence on artificial intelligence challenges our understanding of what it means to be human. So one of the most significant transhumanists, some of you may be familiar with the work of Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil believes that we will eventually become what he calls a post-human species. The term transhumanism was originated by Max Moore over 30 years ago, and it was used to describe the intellectual and cultural movement that affirms the possibility and desirability of fundamentally improving the human condition, right, through technologies. It's a whole fascinating thing. I did kind of a study. I wanted to see how this has evolved in the American Academy of Religion. So I went back through all of the programs of the American Academy of Religion, and I've watched over the last 10 years how this field of study in AAR has just exploded and now it's even made its way into SBL and cited biblical literature as well. In his book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, Yuval Noah Harari, one of the most prominent, he's a historian, Israeli historian, but he's also become a transhumanist philosopher. He takes a much different view. Kurzweil is very optimistic. Harari is optimistic is somewhat, but I think he's much more pessimistic view of the culture. And he describes a future where only highly qualified specialists are used to describe society. And in an article written several years ago titled, "Will People Still Be Useful in the 21st Century?" Harari envisions a future, and I'm going to cite this whole paragraph from this article. "Economic and political power might be concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite. Most people might become economically useless and politically powerless. As biotechnology improves, moreover, it will be possible to extend human lifespans and to upgrade human abilities. But the new wonder treatments might be expensive and might not be freely available to everybody. Therefore, human society in the 21st century may be the most unequal in history, since the upper classes will not only be richer than the rest of humankind, but will also live much longer and be far more talented. And for the first time in history, economic inequality will be translated into biological inequality. Hence, humankind will split into biological castes, an upper caste of upgraded superhumans and a massive lower class of useless people." Fascinating. Now, I think that such predictions about transhumanism, they can really start to sound like science fiction. We can go down that rabbit hole and get lost talking about the future. But I would suggest to you that we don't need to look very far to already see what technology is doing to us, and that there's already a class of useless people in our society, and that or people that are deemed useless, I should say, excuse me. And that technology is impacting their lives. Now, one of the big fears about AI is what we call technological unemployment. There's a lot of predictions about the future. We don't know how it's going to go, but there's many people saying that there's going to be no field of study, medicine, law, everyone is going to be impacted deeply by automation. And it's not going to just come after blue collar jobs, it's going to come after white collar jobs. So a lot of this is speculation. We don't know for sure. But the reality is we don't have to imagine Yuval Noah Harari's dystopian future of useless people. In Future Proof, Kevin Roose warns us that AI-driven technologies like automation already disproportionately affect people in lower income occupations and exacerbates existing racial and gender disparities. It happens in a number of different ways, and it's all through these algorithms, right? so that they have things that rank our social media feeds. They power our interactions with virtual assistants like Alexa and Siri. There's dynamic pricing software that determines how much we pay for hotel rooms and airline tickets. There's these opaque algorithms that are used to determine eligibility for government benefits. They predict policing algorithms that law enforcement agencies use to patrol our neighborhoods. And these impact people of lower income, marginalized people groups, different racial groups, women. There's actually now facial recognition technology that has a hard time identifying gender non-conforming people. And so this technology is affecting everyone, and especially more marginalized people groups. And so Mo Gadot, who I cited earlier, believes that this dystopian future imagined by Harari and others is speculative, but he says that it's basically what we put into machines. If you put bad things into machines, you're going to get bad things out. If you put good things into machines, you're going to get good things out. I think that's kind of somewhat naive right now, but I think he has a point to a degree, because machines reflect the views and biases of their creators, for better or for worse. So we get out of our machines what we put into our machines. And another fascinating book is The Ethical Algorithm, The Science of Socially Aware Algorithm Design by Michael Kearns and Aaron Roth, where they discuss how blind data-driven algorithmic optimization of a seemingly sensible objective can lead to unexpected and undesirable side effects. So, for example, when AI algorithms are used for predictability, we shouldn't be surprised when it produces a model that has widely different false positive rates when applied to different demographic groups. Nor should we be surprised when our algorithms encode the identities of individuals whose data was used for training, when it incentivizes people to misreport their data, or when it turns out to be gameable by data analysts seeking to make their research findings look more significant than they are. And so they see these issues as part of the same problem. The attempt to optimize procedures across complicated domains often leads to dehumanizing outcomes. And I quote, they say, while mathematicians debate the effects of tweaking the error statistics of mathematical learning algorithms, they assert real injustice is being done by the very use of these algorithms in the first place. So what might appear fair from a myopic point of view is seen to be unfair when one takes into account its social context. A leading algorithm design like this would be part of a larger system that further punishes people for being poor, resulting in a feedback loop. So we need to be really serious about how these algorithms are being designed. Okay, the last one is to get into the ecclesial ethical issues here, and I'll wrap up here, and I'll try to do this quickly here. Are we okay on time, Dave? Or anyone?
Yes.
I know we're good.
I'm sorry, Jeff, I was muted. Yes.
All right,
We're good on time.
We're good on time. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. So just last final points here to make, and that is, so in everything I've shared here, I think that we need to begin to recognize that, look, AI is going to be ubiquitous in our lives. It's not going to go away. It's only going to become more and more prevalent. And frankly, I think very few of us want to go back to the way things used to be, right? I mean, that's some of the research that they've done on AI, is that when people are somewhat leery, you have these, there's interesting, that kind of shows the trajectory of how people accept technology and new advances in technology, right? There's those early adopters, then there's the people that kind of come to it later, and then there's the people, the really reluctant people, like just now are learning about Facebook, right? So, but most people don't want things to go back to the way they are. And I, for one, I like technology. Where would we be in the last couple of years? Where would we be right now if we couldn't have communicated the way we have with technology? Zoom is powered by extraordinary algorithms that are only advancing and increasing and helping us be able to stay in touch. And so we don't want to change that. I love the algorithms in my Spotify account. I find all kinds of new cool music all the time that's introduced to me. And so I don't think I'm not suggesting here, I'm probably taking a somewhat negative tone, with this, with technology, but I don't suggest we join the Luddites, right? You all remember the 19th century Luddites. So rather what I want to try to do here is just offer sorry, lost my place here. I want to try to offer just a few some ethical postures for the church, for us, all of us, toward AI. And I'm still working through this. And but these are just a few ideas that I have. So in their book, Humility is the New Smart, Rethinking Human Excellence in the Smart Machine Age, Edward Hess and Catherine Ludwig suggest that we need to embrace a different kind of intelligence to confront the ways of technology and the ways that it challenges our humanness. And they say that we need to do that by seeking behaviors that enable the highest levels of human thinking, learning, emotionally engaging with others, and making meaning together. And so Hess and Ludwig say that this begins by identifying what humans can do that machines cannot do, at least right now. And more people are acknowledging that, yes, someday machines will be able to keep up with probably the most brightest human on earth, but right now they can't. And in the meantime, we cannot forget how important this is. So they say, they call these smart machine age skills. These include, but are not limited to, critical thinking, innovative thinking, creativity, high emotional engagement with others that foster relationship building, collaboration. And one of the most significant skills they say that we can embrace is our humanity. In other words, that we must become more human. And so Hess and Ludwig believe that embracing our humanness begins with humility, which they define as a mindset about oneself that is open-minded, self-accurate, and not all about me, and that enables one to embrace the world as it is in the pursuit of human excellence. You know, and when I first read Humility is the New Smart a few years ago, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount came to my mind. Because Jesus there offers an alternative intelligence, a radically different approach to life. And it's based on this beautiful invitation from Jesus to participate in God's kingdom. And someone who's really helped me, a couple of people who helped me really see this is David Gushee and Glenn Stawson in their book, Kingdom Ethics, Following Jesus in Contemporary Context, where they describe the Sermon on the Mount as an alternative intelligence. A kind of alternative intelligence. I'm putting words in their mouths, of course, here, but an alternative intelligence in God's gracious deliverance that you especially see in the Beatitudes, where those who mourn will be comforted, and the humble will inherit the earth, and those who hunger for righteousness will be filled, and mercy will be shown, and people will see God, and peacemakers will be called children of God, and the faithful will be members of the kingdom of God. And so Jacob Schatzman has a similar perspective in his book on transhumanism and the image of God, where he writes, and I'll quote this in full: while our technologies encourage liturgies of power and control, tempting us to consider moving beyond the human altogether, Jesus' words point in a very different direction. Pursuing salvation, pursuing the kingdom of heaven does not mean evolving beyond what we are. It means becoming like little children. The transhuman self is one that has pursued physical transformation, overcoming physical limitations in order to open up new intellectual and spiritual possibilities. The new self of Christianity, however, is one that has been given new spiritual life, having been made righteous and being renewed in knowledge. This reshapes the new human in a much deeper, profound sense than challenging biological elements can hope to do. And in Future Proof, Kevin Roose, again, have cited numerous times here, he has a similar argument in his book as the new Humility is the New Smart. And he there cites Frank Chen, a venture capitalist who invests in AI startups. And Chen believes that we must return to analog ethics, the skills celebrated in Robert Fullam's classic book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, where, quote, the elementary pre-literate skills of treating other people well, acting ethically, and behaving in pro-social ways. And again, in Future Proof, Kevin develops this idea and what this looks like. He says, like, there's these 9 skills, and one of them is just this, simply is just kind of developing greater sense of compassion and empathy for others. And this reminds me very much of what Gushee says in his book, one of his, in both Kingdom Ethics and his other book on human worth and human value. sacredness of human life. He says human life is sacred. This means that God is consecrated in each and every human being, without exception in all circumstances, a unique, incalculably precious being in elevated status and dignity. Through God's revelation in Scripture and incarnation in Jesus Christ, God has declared and demonstrated the sacred worth of human beings and will hold us accountable for responding appropriately. Such a response begins by adopting a posture of reverence. I'm accepting responsibility for sacred gift that is human life. It includes offering due respect and care to each human being that we encounter. It extends an obligation to protect human life from wanton destruction, desecration, or violation of human rights. A full embrace of the sacredness of human life leads to a full-hearted commitment to fostering human flourishing. And I would say that more than ever in the age of AI, machine learning, robotics, the fourth industrial revolution, in the advancements of these smart technologies, the church needs to take more seriously what Stassen is saying here. What Gushi is saying here in light of what these technologies are doing to humanity, and begin to ask, well, how do we engage with this? Do we just mindlessly say adopt every form of technology that comes along, especially if we can use it for evangelism and getting more people into the church? Right? These are the kind of questions. You remember, I argued that technology is not neutral. So I think these are the kind of things we should be discussing, and we shouldn't just blindly just go along with whatever the latest, greatest technology is that comes along. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer was writing Discipleship in 1936, his nation was consumed with a kind of progress. And at the time, most Christians in Germany saw the rise of National Socialism, the Nazi Party, as good for their nation, especially Adventists. And this was with the only exception was a minority of Christians like Bonhoeffer and others who failed to who believed that people had failed to care about all the useless people in the wake of Nazi progress. And this no doubt weighed on Bonhoeffer as he was reflecting on the meaning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in God's gracious invitation to participate in the incarnation and the death and resurrection of Christ. And for Bonhoeffer, to participate in the life of Christ meant that there was another way to be human, and what we could call a participatory ontology. And in an oft-cited passage on the incarnation of discipleship that I just love, Bonhoeffer writes, in Christ's incarnation, all humanity regains the dignity of bearing the image of God. However, from now on, whoever attacks the least of people attacks Christ, and who took on the human form and who in himself has restored the image of God for all who bear a human countenance. And inasmuch as we participate in Christ, the incarnate one, we also have a part in all humanity, which is born by him. And since we know ourselves to be accepted and born within the humanity of Jesus, our new humanity now also consists in bearing the troubles and sins of all others. The incarnate one transforms his disciples into brothers and sisters of all human beings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Is there anybody in the Centennial Complex yet? Let me look at the participation list. Yes. Okay. Would those in the Centennial Complex want to have a question or comment before we take a break?
You pop up here. Oh, there.
We're not hearing somebody if someone's speaking.
Well, we're on mute right now, though, David. I don't know.
They are coming to the computer. I can see them.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Jeff, I just want to thank you for an amazing presentation. That should be heard by many people. That's all I was going to say. It took a long time to get the mic to me, but thank you.
Thank you. That voice sounds like my good friend, Dr. Henry Lamberton, my colleague, mentor, who I've learned an immense amount from over the years teaching. Is that who that was?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Henry.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
I can't see you. I just see a distant person in the distance.
Anybody else in the Centennial Complex?
So Dave's not there.
Oh.
Who's there?
That's it. Okay, thank you, Jeff. It's very helpful to have you and Donna there, and we will stop so that you can get to church. And the rest of us, let's take a break. 10 minutes from now, we will reconvene.
All right.
Okay,
So we'll have a
if-
chance. We can have some more discussion then at that point, Dave, I'm assuming.
That's right,
Yeah,
Jeff,
now-
people will ask questions and you
Okay.
answer.
All right, I'll be back.
Okay,
Now,
10 minutes.
I'm requesting that you leave because if you don't, people will talk with you. We will miss it.
All right, I'm leaving. Bye.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna be looking for hands and we'll start a queue and we'll start afterwards, so raise your hand. I see Simona. Anyway, I try to see physical hands as well, so, okay. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Good, good. I mean, you have to help her with this stuff. Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, there you go. I think it was huge. I got kind of optimistic about the school of religion. I know Zane, this person I don't. I never knew before.
This is the Branson Sabbath School signing off. Everybody's going to church. So
Okay,
tune in from wherever you are.
Okay, so-
thank you, Jeff, for your help.
Bye. Thank you.
So we have deep learning. We have deep learning. We have, you know, various other ways that these are all algorithm based. They are all require input, and from that input, then they can, quote unquote, learn. True intelligence is ability to create something that from a new information that did not exist before. And I think in this respect, the technology that we have right now, the silicon-based technology that we have in computers, is unable to have through AI, simply because it's too restricted, it's too rigid.
Yeah.
But there is one thing that I want to kind of bring in. This is something that is coming up in medicine, and these are implants. We're talking about brain implants. There are already some brain implants, for example, for people who have Parkinson's disease and so on. But there are ideas about creating implants that can technically contain the entire known knowledge of human race in a very small amount. And then obviously there are various issues that are being raised. So there's an entire new branch of ethics called neuroethics that is being developed as a result. Because, you know, who is going to be responsible if something malfunctions? You know, the same question that we can have, you know, what happens, who is responsible if a self-driving car, you know, gets into an accident? But this is at a much higher level. So what happens if, you know, a person with an implant has a malfunction and as a result kills somebody or kills themselves? Or, and then, you know, lots of other ethical issues. For example, how much can rich people outprice poor people in the knowledge department simply by, you know, instead of going to university and studying, just putting an implant into their head? So lots of new questions that are coming up. And so how do we, I think this is going to be a really important question for the future, not just in medicine, but in many other places. How can we live ethically? And I think this is one thing that I always wonder, that there is so little emphasis on ethics in so many different branches of our research and daily lives. How can we live ethically in this new paradigm, you know, where we will at some point have technology that can overwhelm our current abilities?
Yeah, this is this is great. And I'm not sure I have any answers to that question. I mean, because I'm asking the same things and I'm not sure, and I'm wrestling with them. And you know, I will say this: you bring up one point that stood out to me here that caught my attention. I just listened to a podcast that I recently with a physician by the name of Peter, if I can remember his name, I think it's called Peter Diamandis. He's a medical doctor, and his interest is in longevity, and he's an entrepreneur, and he's been doing a lot of work with investing in a lot of AI for health and longevity. And he was saying that in the next 10 years, that this is what he argues, that healthcare is going to go through a radical transformation. And it's going to be becoming more and more dependent on AI and these kind of technologies, like you're saying, these inserts that are going to be able to monitor our blood pressure, our blood sugars, all kinds of bodily functions. And that many of the things that we were doing, going to a doctor's office to do, that we'll be able to simply do these from our homes through different forms of technology. And he's big on it, and he's investing a lot of money in it, and he's already trying things out himself. And so, you know, I think it's an interesting question about the nature of humanity, and especially I think for us here at Loma Linda, and how we think about what it means to be human and human wholeness. You know, what does that mean ethically, and how, you know, should this be something we should be doing and should be embracing, and how far should we go? I don't I'm not a bioethicist. And so but I think they're fascinating questions. And honestly, I have a Whoop. This is a Whoop device. This is a new company that's come out. It's kind of like the Fitbit, but the technology algorithms are more powerful. And it's amazing what this monitors and is able to tell me on a daily basis, from my sleep patterns to how many calories I'm burning per day, how well my body's rested, all kinds of fascinating information. I love it. I love the technology. And but how far do I go with that? If I find out suddenly that I can implant that in my arm, that put a chip in my arm, should I do that? These are, I don't know, they're just some interesting, and especially for us here at Loma Linda, we who have inherited the tradition of baby fae, and we've had a history with technology, of doing amazing things. And so, yeah, just some, so I don't know the answers.
All right, thank you. I'd like to go to Monty. Monty, you?
Forrest, could you put me on the queue as well?
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Oh, and I'm so honored to be followed by you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I've really enjoyed it. As I was hearing you talk about artificial intelligence, it causes me to just think about our human intelligence, and how the more we learn about our own intelligence, the more we seem to discover how automatic many of our processes are. And I know for myself, I like to think of myself as a very rational person. And what really humbles me is when I discover how much of my thinking is kind of on autopilot. And so when I think about artificial intelligence, it gets me thinking about, in a way, we're transferring some of the autopilot over to things that run on electricity that we plug into, rather than the electrical pulses in our own brains. Being consciously rational, or thinking about the processes rather than letting things go autopilot, is one of the ways we try to deal with our own situation. But is that kind of a solution with AI, or what, for example, if I'm searching the web or something like that, the Google will take me places. Do you see that kind of connection, the being on autopilot, as one of the dangers of AI? And if so, do you have a sense of how we can challenge the autopilot in a way that doesn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater? Because I kind of like the fact that I'm not having to sort through the entire web. So anyway, that's my observation and my question to you.
It's a fantastic question, Monty. And it's something I think about all the time. And, yes. And this point I made earlier about attention, I think we're talking about, Ellen White's, famous saying, and so, I think that this is where the spiritual practices of all the great world religions, and Christianity, we have something to say here, and we realize the importance of attention and our focus and our being mindful and present. Obviously, the Eastern religions have been more intentional about that, but I think our ability to pay attention is one of our great strengths as human beings that we don't always fully develop. And I think that technology has a way of taking us off of autopilot. I think for me, what I've thought about, Monty, is that it's even maybe, and this is what I was trying to get to about, the question of what is technology doing to us bodily? And so I have ADD, I struggle with that. And I've come to only realize it more and more as here in my later years of adulthood. And I realize that I do have this tendency, that I can get on social media and I can just start, get lost in something. But I think it's doing something to me. What's the word I'm looking for? It's doing something to me bodily as well. Like in my mind, it's doing something neuropsychologically to me, and in my brain patterns in my mind. So there's a lot of people that are beginning to explore this and be concerned about it. And you know, there's a lot of people recommending like doing a digital detox, where you are very intentional about how your use of media, becoming a digital minimalist. I feel I've tried to do that in my life in the recent years. For example, this is just my own choice. I've turned I turned all notifications off on my phone. Everything, every app asked me to notify me. No, the only notifications I get on my phone are my text messages and phone calls. And then I keep everything on silent. My phone is never on, like I never can hear anything. So those are just a couple of things I've done. I've really cut back on my use of social media. I was an early adopter of all forms of social media, early on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And but about 3 years ago, I've cut back majorly. I don't post anything on Facebook anymore. I don't use Facebook. I haven't been on Facebook in weeks. The only time I got on Facebook was just now to communicate with Dave and about the Sabbath school class this week. But I'm hardly ever on Facebook. I don't use Instagram very much anymore. Twitter I look at occasionally, and I'm very careful about curating what I see and what I watch. But that's also a risk, because back to what Forrest was saying, I can get myself into a particular style and I can only see people that share my view. But all that to say is I think that there's more and more people that are becoming aware of and asking, what is this technology literally doing to our brains? And if you've seen things like the social media, where there's a lot of neuroscientists that are saying it actually, that it is. And this question you made about free will is fascinating. Yuval Noah Harari, I just heard him interviewed just the other day, and he was saying, yeah, free will is overrated. I thought, wow, but and we have a group of our scholars and colleagues here that have actually written a book about this and explored this question about neuroscience and free will. And anyways, but yeah, thank you. I don't know if I got to what you were getting at, but yeah, it's fascinating.
Okay, thank you very much. By the way, just say, Jeff, that there's one person I read is they take a digital Sabbath.
Yes, that's another, I've heard people using the digital Sabbath. Yes, idea. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I
think it's great.
I'd like to go to David at this time. David?
I'd like to be last in the queue.
Okay, then we'll go to Bronwyn. Bronwyn.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks,
For your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
As has been previously said, you've done a lot of work in this.
Thank you.
And I really appreciated the comments that you just mentioned in how AI affects our brain. I've done a lot of reading in this area in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I have noticed that if I have too much screen time, it affects my mood and other things. My question is, you mentioned earlier in your discourse that adolescents are most affected by AI as a group. Have any studies with this group in relation to personality and temperament? You may be familiar with Myers-Briggs, Kiersey Bates, the temperament sorter.
Mm-hmm.
How does are NFs more affected by AI than NTs? That is, are the feelers more affected than the thinkers when it comes to this particular group?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't, Bronwyn, I don't know. I haven't really looked into that at all. I haven't read anything about that or come across anything. If you do, I'd be interested to learn more. I will say that to your question about adolescence, I don't have any, I just keep hearing things in all these different avenues of where I'm reading and people I'm listening to and conversations I'm having, and just, people, it's for me right now, it just seems to be pretty anecdotal. And being a father of teenagers and adolescents, and what I've observed over the last year, especially with the pandemic and conversations I'm having. So I don't have anything hard data to say the studies, and again, what I was specifically saying about the adolescent issue was a lot that was coming from the film, the Social Dilemma film. Again, I'd have to go back and look at it more closely. The film has gotten some criticism, but I would have to go back and see, you know, what exactly. But I mean, just in the last few months, I know of 3 young people who have committed suicide that I have a 6-degree separation with. One was a student right here at La Sierra.
Right.
Now, this, you know, I don't know what technology, what anything had to do with that, but again, anecdotally, it just seems to me that there is something's going on profound. And I think that you know, more and more people saying, look, well, all the issues with young teen women and bodily issues and body image and stress over that, when you look at the rise in that and you look at the rise of social media, more and more people are saying there is some kind of connection. There has to be some linkage there. But whether right now we have really significant long-term data, if anyone knows, let me know. But I haven't come across anything. And I haven't done, you know, research in it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'd like to go to McKinley now. McKinley.
Thank you, Forrest. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Gang. I think is that how you say your last name?
Yes.
So I've got, I think, 2 quick observations and a question. First, I want to acknowledge the efficiency benefits of AI in engineering and design by the drastic reduction in design and production timeframes by up to 95% sometimes. So that's a great benefit that I think perhaps the masses might not be exposed to, but we see in this space. I also can't help but imagine that God looked through the ages and concluded that there would be a time when humans would be so distracted that they needed allocated time, and hence the blessing of the Sabbath. And then finally, as AI proliferates and the knowledge disparities intensify, there seems to be the tendency that the disadvantaged in the knowledge area will be worse off. And I wonder if you can share your thoughts about what society might do to address that.
So I'm going to see if I understand. So like our knowledge will be worse off because of AI? Did I misunderstand?
No, people who have less access to knowledge would be worse off.
Yeah.
And the social disparities will persist. And what can society do about that?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, this is very important, and this is, I think, getting to what, you know, this point of Yuval Noah Harari, the useless people, that I think that what a lot of people are who are writing about this, like the authors of this book, you know, AI Ethics, are saying is that right now we need to be more aware of the kind of algorithms that we're creating and how our biases are getting programmed into these algorithms and the effects that they're having on marginalized peoples. And you know, like I mentioned, the example of how, you know, lending algorithms will somehow they're prejudiced toward Black people, right? That there's evidence of that, or it'll pick or other certain types of groups of people. So I think that right now the only AI that we have is what we create, and it's like Mo Gadot says, you get out of it what you put into it. And so we need to become more and more aware of how our biases are getting programmed into the very algorithms themselves, and they get perpetuated. So I think, like any technology, the only way to stay, I mean, when we had cars, right, the only way that we were able to come up with seatbelts is thanks to the Ralph Naders of the world. And so you know, we're going to have to stay on top of the technology, continually asking what is it doing to us. And it, just as any other thing that's come before, we're going to have to collectively as a society become more and more aware of what the technology might be doing to certain populations of people. That's one of my first initial thoughts. You know, one of the concerns, I think, again, and what I was trying not to do too much in this paper was not to go down too far down the road of the what ifs and the speculation and the, you know, imagining the future, which a lot of transhumanists are very futuristic oriented and just thinking. But I was just trying to say, what is it? I'm trying to think, what is it doing? What is going on right now? So I think one of the fears, but to just go their way a little bit, is I think as AI continues to grow, we get more and more toward what we call this AGI, you know, artificial general intelligence, and once machines can start creating themselves, that's going to be really interesting. If we get to that point, we may all be gone by then. I hope, you know, the world is remade and Jesus is with us, and we're in the new, you know, on the other side of eternity before that happens. But, you know, if not, you know, who knows?
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I want to come to Dana at this time, and then I'll go to David. So Dana.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Gang, for this presentation. I have to admit that I was kind of disappointed when I've heard that you are not talking about Bonhoeffer, but
I can come back and talk about Bonhoeffer if you want.
Yes, but you gave us a very extremely interesting presentation, and with a lot of new information and a lot of good questions and good answers. So thank you so much. Thank you. I wanted to go back to what Bronwyn said about the effect of AI on teenagers, and I can see this first hand with my daughter and her colleagues, and especially during the pandemic. And I can see how people are changing their lifestyle, and they are trying to change their bodies to conform to a certain, you know, type that's considered desirable, and is affecting them deeply. And, you know, maybe between Bronwyn and you and the Loma Linda resources, you can start a research on this. That would be extremely interesting. And I'm thinking about the idea of addiction. Addiction to phones and to media, digital media is a different form of addiction, and maybe we need different type of treatments for that, and that should be part of the future of medicine. Particularly, you know, as a sociologist and as a person that always fought for equal opportunities and social justice, I'm deeply, deeply troubled by the new inequality. I think, if I remember the quote correctly, it was the economic inequality is transformed into a biological inequality, and we will have a different type of caste. We already have that because of the insurance, but it's becoming worse and worse. So yeah, thank you again for a deeply thoughtful and thought-provoking presentation.
Thank you so much, Dana. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to do some more research on that with adolescents. But yeah, you know, I think you bring up a similar point that Monty did too about our attention. I would encourage, if you're interested, the work of Johann Hari. This is not Yuval Noah Harari. This is Johann Harari, and he's written a lot about why we can't pay attention and addiction to our technology. And he shares in his work, he has shared a personal experience that he had where Johann went on a digital fast for months. I forget how long it was. Was it a year? I can't remember how long it was. And he came back out of that experience and started re-entering back using his technology again. And he said he slipped right back in to exactly where he was before, just like within days.
You talked about the rise in depression and rise in suicide. I've seen some data yesterday that the depression rise is 130%, the anxiety rise 110%. I'm not sure which, it's probably during the pandemic. It's, gosh, I lost my point.
No, I agreed, and I see.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. The rise in ADHD, it's skyrocketing, and I believe it's connected with technology.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I anecdotally, it certainly feels that way to me.
Just when they finish, you say.
Okay. All right. Okay. We're coming to the end of our time. David, it's to you now, and you could have the rest of the
Forrest. This is Stephen.
Oh, Stephen, I'm just gonna have to go to David here. David?
Okay, let's have Stephen and his wife both talk.
Okay, so at this point, it's just me. Just a couple of observations. As a clinician, I work with a lot of teenagers relative to social media. And my analogy that I give both the teenagers and their parents is that entering social media is the equivalent of walking into traffic on the freeway. You're bound to get hit, and more than likely you're going to be injured dramatically. And so I take a very hard line in terms of encouraging parents to limit the exposure to that for that very reason. And the second is in terms of attention issues, because I work with a lot of both kids and adults that have attention deficit diagnosis. And a couple components that it's not that people with attention deficit are unable to focus. Their problem is they're focused on everything at once. And therefore they can't discriminate as to what the priority should be. And that leads to the frustration, the anxiety, and the depression, because they can't figure out what should come first. And as a result, what I encourage is that the motto for those challenges is less is more. Winnowing your field of focus down to only what's right immediately in front of you, focusing on one thing at a time. If there is ever a curse for the attention deficit disorder, it's multitasking. And the other is that we understand scientifically that the wiring for people with attention deficit in the brain is different. And it's different in one major respect. There is an overabundance of dopamine receptors in the attention deficit brain. And as a consequence, that chemical which enables us to focus is constantly being vacuumed up. There's not enough available. So we have to look for other ways to produce dopamine. Medication is certainly one, but there are other avenues. Physical activity and exercise is a great alternative to medication and can be used in conjunction with medication where necessary, because physical activity generates dopamine production. And recent research also demonstrates that physical activity also gives bursts of protein, which is a stabilizer. And so I always encourage, it doesn't have to be super strenuous. If kids can go for a 10-minute walk or do a series of quick jumping jacks before school, they have a better ability to focus when class starts. And so those are just a couple of observations. And by the way, we understand now the importance of gut health in terms of the brain chemistry. And so nutrition is critically important for not only everyone, but particularly for attention deficit issues. So just, I thought it might be helpful to insert those comments.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, Stephen, it's great to have a clinician's point of view and what you've shared. That's, yeah, thank you. I know I just personally can identify what you're saying in terms of the exercise and how it helps me.
Okay, I think that we are ready to conclude. I don't see anybody else wanting to speak now. Let me thank, first of all, our participants today. The questions have been to the point and helpful, and I think very illuminating, even though this is a new topic for all of us, or I should say for many of us. I want to thank Jeff for two things. One of them is complimenting me for having read things I haven't read. And so I feel honored by that.
What was that?
Oh, I haven't read any of the books you mentioned, not one. So I need to.
No, I was referring, I thought you were part of I was referring to the group of you that did the work with, what's his name from Claremont on the neuroscience and theology.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. But you mentioned a lot of books and you would say, oh, of course you all know this. And no, I don't. Maybe everybody else, but I surely don't. So thank you for that honor.
Okay.
Thank you too for this presentation and leading out in the discussion. You and I will talk about when you can come back, maybe to continue this, but certainly to have some reflections about Bonhoeffer. So here's the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
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 Gang, Jeff, before you,